Okay, what we're going to be working on today is we're going to be working on 7-1, solving equations with variables on both sides. So let's get started with this problem right here. This is a very basic problem. 5x plus 4 equals 3x minus 2. Now what you'll see here that's different than other problems is you have variables on both sides. So the first rule you need to do is you need to look at what variable is smaller. When you find the smaller variable, that's the one you should take away first. So the smaller variable here is 3x as opposed to 5x. So we're going to go ahead and subtract the smaller variable first. And 3x minus 3x is 0. 5x minus 3x is 2x. Bring down the rest, and we're left with this. Now one of the goals when we're doing this is to have the variable on one side and the numbers on the other. If you already have one variable on one side, then the only thing you really need to concentrate on is moving all the numbers or all the constants, the numbers without variables, to the other side. So we need to move this 4 over here. And what we're going to do is, because it's a positive 4, we're going to use its opposite, which is negative 4, to move it over here. Positive 4 and negative 4 cancel out each other. So we're left with 2x equals, we add these up, negative 2 and negative 4, which is negative 6. And then we still do not have the variable by itself. So what we need to do here is divide it by 2, because that'll 2 divided by 2 will give us a 1 and an x, so 1x. And what we do to one side, of course, we do to the other. 2 divided by negative 6 is going to be, well, first of all, positive divided by negative is going to be a negative. And 2 divided by 6 is going to be 3. So that's your answer for that one. Okay, one of the bigger problems we have when we're doing these equations is fractions. To me, they're pretty easy, but I know you guys have a tough time with them. So we're going to go ahead and start with this problem. And as you can see, it's going to have a fraction attached to the variable, but it should be no problem getting rid of that. The important thing to remember here is we're still following the same exact rules as with the first example we did. So the rule states that we need to get rid of the smallest variable first. Here we're fortunate because both these fractions for the variables have the same denominator, so it's easy to tell by looking at the numerator which one's smaller. 2/5 is obviously smaller than 4/5. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract 2/5 y from 2/5 y, which is going to cancel it out. Then I'm going to do the same thing to my left side, and it's a simple subtraction fraction problem, which the variable stays the same, or I'm sorry, the denominator stays the same, and you just subtract, if it's subtraction, the numerators, which is 4 minus 2, which is 2. So I'm left with 2/5 y. I'll separate it right here. I'm left with 2/5 y when I subtract 4/5 y from 2/5 y from 4/5 y. So now I'm going to bring down the numbers, the constants that are left on both sides. And like I said before, you follow the same rules. So now I have the variable on my left side. I want all the constants, all the numbers on the right side. So I'm going to go ahead and move this 8, and the way I move it is by using its opposite to get rid of it. And I'm left with 2/5 y equals 24. Okay, this is the tough part. When we get to this, where we have the variable on one side and the number on the other, and we still have the fraction attached to the variable. It's actually very easy for this one. The rule that you have to follow this one, if the variable is after the fraction, so for example right here it's 2/5 y, if it's after the fraction, all I really have to do is use its reciprocal. If I use the reciprocal of 2/5, which is 5 over 2, I can turn that into a 1. And then that'll give me a nice 1y, and that'll give me y by itself. The only issue with this, and it's not really an issue, it's just a matter of work, is that you have to do the same thing to the other side. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to multiply this side by its reciprocal. The reciprocal, remember, is when you flip it around the other way. So 2/5, the reciprocal is 5 over 2, and that's because the numerator now becomes the denominator, and the denominator now becomes the numerator. So 5 times 2 is 10, and 2 times 5 is 10. So 10 over 10 is 1y, or just y. So now you have y by itself. The only thing is you have to do it the same way on this side. But that should be no problem because you should know that you cannot multiply a number and a fraction. So you would simply have to turn 24 into a fraction by putting it over 1. Now 24 times 5. 24 times 5 is going to give you 120. And then 1 times 2, remember you're multiplying these, is going to give you 2. And all you have to do really here is, with this improper fraction, is find out, or divide it, or find out how many times 2 goes into 120, which I know is going to be 60. So at the end we get y equals 60. So it's very easy. It follows the same rules. The only thing you have to understand is that when you have this fraction and the variable is not part of the fraction but comes after it, you have to use its reciprocal. Okay, here we see the other example of when we would see an equation with a fraction. But you notice that this one, instead of the fraction and then the variable following it, now we have the variable as part of the fraction. Now, this is good and bad because it's more confusing to see what to do, but if you follow these instructions, you should be fine. The number one thing you should see is whenever you have x as your numerator of a fraction, it's really easy to get it by itself. And remember, like I said, all fractions are division problems, so x divided by 4, or 0.4, is very easy to get rid of because what you're getting rid of is the divided by 0.4. So as you know, you get rid of these numbers by doing its opposite. So how do you get rid of divided by 0.4? Well, you're going to multiply it by 0.4. So you're going to multiply the denominator. Multiply by 0.4 will get rid of divided by 0.4. So that'll go ahead and cancel that out. But you also have to do it to one side because what you do to one side, you have to do to the other. Now, actually, kind of made a mistake there. This problem, this whole set right here is already done. So what you want to do is you want to keep that in parentheses. And then you add the 0.4. Okay. Now, x is by itself over here. And now with this case, you have this, which really can't be separated. So what you have to do is, in order for this to work out, you need to use distributive property to break these guys out of their parentheses. So 0.4 times 2x is going to give you 0.8x, and I'm simply just multiplying. And then 0.4 times 1.2 is going to give you, I'm bringing down the plus sign, is going to give you 0.48. Okay, so now we got a little bit easier of a problem. It's kind of confusing because it has a lot of decimals now, but it shouldn't be too hard. The hardest thing that I think on this problem now is some students do not understand that 0.8 is actually smaller than 0.8x is actually smaller than x. And that's because remember, class, that this is 1x. It's 1x, this is less than 1x. So when we talk about doing the first rule, which is subtracting the smallest x, we're actually going to subtract 0.8x because it is smaller than 1x, which I just like putting x. So we're going to go ahead and do that. That's going to cancel this out. Now 1x minus 0.8x is going to give me 0.2x. And then that equals 0.48, which is what I have left over here on this side. The best way to do this is just pretend that it doesn't have decimals, and you should be pretty easy to figure out. So you're obviously going to divide this by 0.2 to get rid of the 0.2 that's bothering x from being by itself. Go ahead and do that. The 0.2 cancel each other out here. Right here you actually do need to divide, and it's probably the best thing to divide because then you'll run into another problem that I'd like to point out. And here's the problem. As we've talked about in the past and even in 6th grade, we've talked about that the divisor in a division problem can never have a decimal in it. So this has a decimal in it, and that's a big time problem. So what we need to do is we need to move this over here to the end of it so that it's just a regular 2. And there's no decimal in it anymore. Or if there is a decimal, it's at the end, which it's not really necessary, so I could just erase it. But since I moved that over once, I also have to move over the one in the middle. The one in the dividend. So I'm going to go ahead and move that right there. Now I have 2 divided by 4.8. I'm going to bring up the decimal to the top. 2 goes into 4, obviously, twice. Bring down the 8. 2 goes into 8 4 times. Finish it off, and that's my answer. X equals 2.4. And like I said, it's not that hard. You just got to give it a try. Remember that when you're going to have two different problems with X being part of the fraction, and hopefully you could use these steps to help you out.